Hello everybody, and welcome back to the House of the Wed, which is both my humble abode full of all things creepy and also the place where your suggestions reign king. So if you have an idea you want to see turned into lovely What Culture content, then leave a comment in the comment section, leave a chat in the Premiere chat, leave a Skyplane message in the Skyplane message zone, also known as the sky, and maybe I'll see it and turn it into lovely What Culture content for you. So yeah, if you've got spooky ideas, you want a spooky shout out, this is the place to be. Don't say I never treat you. And speaking of lovely treats, we have one search from Adam Brailsford this week. Thank you, Adam Brailsford, who has suggested we take a look at banned horror games that are just too damn scary, that have been banned for being so scary. Now, I hope you're all buckled in and ready for the scariness, the terrifying nature of these games that managed to get them in a whole heap of trouble around the world, because whoo, I sure as hell ain't. It definitely is not a case of the censors being too sensitive and going full, what about the children, in their banning. It's definitely because they're super duper scary and will shock you to your core. It is definitely to do with the censors as well, but hey, it's all interesting, fun stuff. It's still something, they're still very scary, they're still got banned. Have a great time with this, and I will see you again at the end. In the meantime, I am the terrifying Ash from WhatCulture Gaming. You are in the House of the Wed, and these are 9 horror video games banned for being too scary. 9. Manhunt 2. Rockstar Games is no stranger to courting controversy, and after the original murder simulator Manhunt was deemed injurious to the public good by New Zealand authorities whilst being incorrectly blamed for a high-profile UK murder, the publisher only doubled down on the transgressiveness for the sequel. Less than a month before Manhunt 2's planned release, it was refused classification by both British and Irish ratings boards, claiming the release posed unjustifiable harm risks to both adults and minors. The US ratings body, ESRB, meanwhile, issued it with an adults-only rating, and given that Nintendo, Microsoft and Sony categorically do not allow AO games on their consoles, it meant that Manhunt 2 was effectively also banned in the US. The game was eventually released in America several months later after Rockstar undertook comprehensive edits to the game's violence, namely blurring brutal executions or removing them entirely whilst also ditching the rating system for kills. However, it took an additional year's worth of legal appeals before the BBFC were finally pounded into contrition and the censored Manhunt 2 was finally released in the UK. 8. We Happy Few. We Happy Few is a survival horror game in which the player tries to stay alive in an alternate history 1960s Britain, a fading dystopia in which the authorities attempt to keep civilians pacified by use of a hallucinogenic drug, joy, which blinds them to the true tattered state of the nation. A chilling and relatable vision for these troubled times for sure, albeit one that apparently hit home a little too hard for the Australian censors, who felt that the player's ability to take joy in order to make the game easier might also cause players to think that real-world drugs were inherently advantageous. Developers Compulsion Games responded in a statement, saying, "It's a society that is forcing its citizens to take joy, and the whole point of the game is to reject this programming and fight back." The ban was eventually overturned 2 months later by the Australian Ratings Board. But a year later, the ban was inexplicably reinstituted, believed to be a result of DLC once again tipping the balance past the Australian government's tolerances. All this for a game that very clearly was a little too clever and real for the dunderhead censors. 7. Condemned Criminal Origins. This is an especially peculiar banning given that it occurred long after the game had actually been released. Both Condemned games are incredibly violent and intense psychological horror titles in which the player attempts to melee their way to safety whilst being pursued by murderous psychopaths. On the eve of its 2008 release, the sequel Condemned 2 Bloodshot was indexed by Germany's Federal Department for media harmful to young persons, resulting in the game eventually being banned several months later. Far more bizarrely, the original Condemned had been banned a mere 2 months earlier under a representation of violence statute, despite having been commercially available for over 2 years at the time of its banning. The game was banned due to its cruel or otherwise inhuman acts of violence against human beings in a manner which expresses a glorification, and the statutes claim that it injures human dignity. Over a decade later, both Condemned games are still officially banned in Germany, ultimately just confirming how nerve-shreddingly authentic their seedy, makes you want to shower nihilism truly is. 6. Any games featuring blood or corpses. In China. Last year, the Chinese government made the landmark ruling that they would no longer be releasing games featuring corpses or blood of any kind, not even if the blood was recoloured green, as has been a common tactic for skirting censors worldwide. This is in addition to also banning the sale of mahjong and poker games, as well as titles that explore China's complicated political history. It's ultimately not dissimilar to China's film censorship body refusing to classify movies with an overpowering supernatural or occult theme, speaking to a greater superstition in the country regarding death and ghosts in particular. Even so, outright banning the presence of blood in video games, something every single living person on the planet possesses a fair few pints of, seems flatly ridiculous. Unsurprisingly, many games have opted to release censored or altered versions in China, because the market is simply just too huge to ignore. 5. Left 4 Dead 2. As ludicrously enjoyable as the Left 4 Dead games are, and with a few friends, they're even quite hilarious, Australia's pesky OFLC stuck their nose in again, refusing to classify Left 4 Dead 2 because it failed to meet the standards of an MA15+ rating. The highest rating in the country at the time until 2013's R18+ was introduced. The OFLC cited Left 4 Dead 2's realistic, frenetic and unrelenting violence as making it unacceptable for sale in Australia, despite the first game being released without incident. Valve fought back against the ban in the weeks leading up to the game's planned release, but the Classification Review Board upheld the ban, largely due to the insufficient delineation between the depiction of zombie characters and the human figures. Valve had to ultimately settle for releasing a heavily cut version of the game which removed decapitation, dismemberment, wound detail, or piles of dead bodies, basically all the fun and creepy stuff, until almost 5 years later in August 2014, when the uncut version was finally reclassified as R18+ and authorised for sale. 4. Outlast 2. Despite the introduction of the R18+ rating in Australia in 2013, that still wasn't enough for first-person horror sequel Outlast 2 to be granted a release. Or at least it was at first, with the ACB taking massive umbrage with the game's implied sexual violence. Outlast 2 is certainly full of grotesque and at times envelope-pushing imagery, though given that no other major gaming market in the world followed Australia's lead, eyebrows were immediately raised by fans and indeed developers Red Barrels themselves. Hilariously, it turned out that Red Barrels had accidentally sent the ACB footage from the alpha version of the game, which contained especially transgressive content which the developer had already decided to not include in the final game. In a happy ending, the ban was overturned a mere 2 days later when Red Barrels sent in amended footage of the final build, which was granted a release under the R18+ banner. That said though, aren't we all at least a little bit curious about exactly what horrific smut the developers actually sent to the ratings board? 3. Silent Hill Homecoming. When Homecoming was being certified, Australia's Office of Film and Literature Classification objected to a horrific scene in which protagonist Alex and cultist Margaret Holloway wrestle over an electric drill, ending with either Holloway's face being drilled into a bloody mess or Alex getting drilled in the eye. Either way, not so fun. The OFLC called this and several other mutilation sequences in the game high impact enough to refuse it a classification, effectively banning Homecoming from being sold in the country. And much the same approach was also taken in Germany. The game was eventually granted a release in both countries, however, once Konami created a censored version several months later, in which these scenes were edited with new camera angles which concealed much of the explicit violence. Granted, many impatient fans had already imported the bloodier original version from abroad by that point, resulting in the German authorities eventually seizing a shipment of uncensored copies in November 2010. Oops. 2. Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. The Danganronpa series only verges on the fringes of the horror genre, but apparently even that was too much for South Korea's Game Rating and Administration Committee, which banned the sale of Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony several months before its planned release. It was banned under the ruling which cites a concern for societal disruption due to amplified portrayal of crime, violence, sex, and etc., which in turn would incite criminal behaviour or copycat crimes. The GRAC added that the game had crossed a line where it was difficult to allow in this society, which was widely accepted to be a response to the recent murder and dismemberment of an 8-year-old girl. Given that the Danganronpa series is focused on the grisly deaths and occasional dismemberment of high schoolers, the ratings board clearly suffered from a reactionary moral panic, and terrified that the game might influence youngsters, rejected it for sale entirely. 1. Fear 2 Project Origin. Australia's OFLC banned horror FPS Fear 2 Project Origin from sale in the country due to its extensive violence and unforgiving tone. Their statement cited numerous examples of the player's ability to inflict dismemberments, slit throats in close-up, and spray blood across the screen, whilst expressing how disturbed they were by the game's enhanced graphics and realistic behaviour of human and mutant foes. What exactly defines a realistic mutant then? Released years before Australia finally instituted the R18+ certificate, Fear 2 was refused classification as an MA15+, leading to its de facto banning. Many commentators pointed out the OFLC's bizarre hypocrisy towards horror-themed games though, given that more action-centric violent games like Grand Theft Auto and Gears of War had faced little resistance releasing in Australia. Yet around a month later, the ACB stepped in and reversed the OFLC's decision, stating that Fear 2 could be released with an MA15+ rating. Phew! And that's our list. Thank you so much for joining me for these horrible, scary, banned games. I hope you had a lovely time. Don't forget to check out the main channel with our lovely other horror content on there for movies as well. 1 part, 2 part, join them together, make a lovely Wednesday double bill. Yes, please and thank you. In the meantime, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, sacrifice first one child to the overlords of WhatCulture, and come back again soon. There's always lovely content going on here, and lots of scary stuff too. So if you like the scary stuff, keep on coming back. If you don't like the scary stuff, keep on coming back, because there's more other stuff as well. Anyway, have a lovely day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!